right, so welcome to Krav Life. My name is Paul Simos, and today we got a special guest, Mr. Etienne Ferreira. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing very well. Thank you for having me.
Perfect. And what part of the world are you talking to us from today?
I'm in Cape Town, South Africa.
Nice. So, for the people that don't know you,
Okay.
can you give us a little bit of like your background? How did you get into Krav Maga? Like, were you a martial artist before? Like, when did all this start?
Okay, when I got into Krav Maga, I wasn't necessarily a martial artist. I've always been interested in martial arts since I was very young. So I think it was 5 or 6 when I started to do just normal karate, you know, the normal kiddies in the afternoon doing Tang Soo Do karate. That kind of established the interest, which I'm quite thankful for because it kept me out of doing the wrong things. And then pursue that interest through school, played a lot of sports, and then after school, I really got interested in a lot of the Bruce Lee books, like Jeet Kune Do, that whole system, and he brought out a book series where he showed defenses against weapons and knives and multiple attacks and everything. And I realized that's actually what I was looking for. I tried then to do martial arts because that's what I knew. I was looking for martial arts then at an older age. And it's then when I discovered Krav Maga.
And like, who did you start studying with? Was it in South Africa that you were doing this studying?
Yeah, I was very, very, very fortunate that, initially I didn't know anything about Krav Maga, especially being in South Africa where we are kind of lost in the world to get the new stuff. So Krav Maga obviously existed for a very long time. I'm 40 years old now. I think I was 21, roundabout there, where I was looking, and I went to a gym and I saw a sign of a guy just promoting training. It was normal tactical training and it looked like combat. I don't know what it was called. His name is Idana Bolnik, which I believe you also had on your show.
Talk to Eden. Yep.
Yeah, very, very strong character, but phenomenal teacher. So I was very fortunate that when I met him, I was basically very fresh out of the army, and he was obviously a combat soldier in the Israeli army. So yeah, and then we started my training there. I wanted to go to the British Army, so that is what I wanted to do with my life, and I felt like I needed some training. So I didn't start with my journey didn't start so I could learn Krav Maga per se. I just wanted to learn combat, and then starting meeting an Israeli from a combat soldier from Israel, living in South Africa was quite unique. And starting to train, and eventually I found out, well, it's actually called Krav Maga, although his system is called Kala. I mean, but in the beginning it was marketed as obviously as Krav Maga, just for the use of the words.
And then from there, did you ever make it into the British Army?
No, we've got. I don't want to go too much into South Africa's history and background and politics and everything. So, but that's obviously a quite strong thread that runs through our country. So, I wanted to join the British Army specifically to do something adventurous. You know, just get out. I was 20 years old, 21 years old. I figured, let's go and do that. When I met, obviously, Dan, I was quite happy with the training I was receiving. It kind of stimulated all those interests. I was doing shooting, doing tactics and Krav Maga and you name it. So, and he actually had a chat to me and said, why do you want to go fight for a country which is not yours? And that kind of convinced me to stay. And yeah, I never pursued a military career, but I've been involved with training ever since.
And when did your training transition into instructing?
I was initially, when I started my training up in Johannesburg, Pretoria, Johannesburg, a province over there. And then I've always wanted to move to Cape Town. So I decided in 2010, I wanted to move down to Cape Town, which is now 11 years ago. And the skill that I had was what I had. So and I decided to open the business down in Cape Town, which was a facility. We started with 6 people on a concrete floor, and it's grew into what we have today with about 200 students doing Krav Maga, only Krav Maga on a sustainable basis.
Oh, nice. And how do you find let's see, how do I put this? How do you find that like, is Krav Maga one of those skills that you feel is needed, especially for the civilian population in Cape Town?
Yeah, look, I'm very, I always compare Krav Maga to boxing because we all know what boxing looks like, again, in terms of technique, okay? Because if you speak to anybody on the street, they will, 10 people, they all know what boxing looks like, okay? Now, in terms of Krav Maga, just the name Krav Maga, it's a broad spectrum, like you'll know. There's so many associations, so many instructors and whatnot, and they all have their place. So I'm very scared to say, is Krav Maga the thing that South Africa needs? I truly believe that proper combat training is what a country like South Africa needs, whatever you want to call it. Why I use a metaphor of boxing, there's a big difference between somebody who boxes for a world championship fight, like let's say a Manny Pacquiao or Anthony Joshua, versus somebody who does boxing in a commercial Globo gym for fitness. It's still called boxing, but it's completely two separate things. And that's where, so to answer your question from straightforward, yes, what I teach, we call it Truekrav. That's obviously the company. But I focus more on what can I provide my clients that adds to the combat training, because that is critical in this country. In the last 3 months, we had over 5,600 murders in South Africa, which is, yeah. So that equates, I tried to work out the equation earlier, and that's 62 murders per day, every single day for the last 3 months. So it kind of, you've met South Africans as well in Canada, and I can promise you the reason why they moved from South Africa is probably for safety. If you to all of them, so the kids can play safely in the streets and they could move freely. Yeah, we have freedom of movement here, but I mean, you're safe. So yeah, and that's why we kind of, I think I didn't listen to the interview that you had with Etienne, but I'm pretty sure his training would have also been proper combat training for a real situation.
And what are some? So do you tailor your training to the most common types of situations that people are going to find themselves in? Because like people that I've talked to from South Africa, like carjackings are big there, right?
Yeah. So to answer that, if you like the stats that I just gave you, those are our official government crime stats, which and those are reported crimes. There's a hell of a lot of unreported crimes as well. Like especially in a third world country where your policing system is not that great. So to get back to your question about how do we tailor it, yeah, we do. We focus a lot more on providing a strong weapon aspect as well. So defenses from handguns, knives, stabs, multiple attacks, home invasions, carjackings, obviously. But it all boils down. It's not like you have to have a specific curriculum just for car hijacking, or you need to have a specific curriculum just for attacks in the house. If you teach somebody from scratch according to the correct principles, then they should be able to adapt. So we will focus a lot on adapting the so when somebody comes for training, they need to learn first and foremost what does not work, and the principles. How do you need to respond? You first need to submit and look if there's a weapon, and then you need to use the element of surprise. Those are all the principles of combat, basically. So we hammer a lot on that. Add the technique into that, so that the student is not just relying on technique, but he remembers the principle first. And then we work on how to adapt it in different situations so that they can survive. You give them the best option to survive a carjacking or a home invasion or a simple abduction. I've had in the studio, if you just look at behind me there's a knife on the, I don't know, yeah, there's a knife right there on a seat. That's one of my students who survived the knife attack, a stab. Above it, you can see there's a girl's hand and her neck. She survived. She disarmed the knife to her throat. So, and all of them came back and didn't say, well, thank you for the technique that they learned, okay? Because the technique is only one little aspect of it. It was more that way into it, because combat will never be perfect, and them to keep going, even if it's against odds.
Mhm. So you cut out a little bit when you were running down the principles. Can you
Okay.
go over the principles again for our audience? Like, what are the
Okay.
principles that you teach?
Yeah. Yeah, first and foremost, before I even teach any combat, we teach to avoid it. Okay, so
Mhm.
for us, you fight for your life. You don't necessarily fight for your possessions. Now, it seems like a really, like a sissy thing to do, but for me, when I say you don't fight for your possessions, if somebody's grabbing your handbag and they're running and they've already got 20 meters between you and them and they're running away, don't chase after them and try and catch them. What are you going to do with them when you catch them? Because in South Africa, more often than not, there's a weapon involved. Okay, so
Mhm.
for us, I first teach everybody that when you're going to fight, it needs to be because you're going to fight for your life or the life of a family member. And in that, I put something like rape in as well. If a girl
Mhm.
is murdered or raped, I count it as the same thing. Okay, so something that's going to do grievously bodily harm. That's what I need to tune them in for. Okay, then that brings down. So now the principles of it means whenever attack arrived, you are not going to know on the day that it's you that are the one that's being attacked. You're not going to know you're the victim on the day of the attack. The attacker
Right.
is the only one that knows of their attack happening. So you're sitting with two completely separate individuals here. When the attack happens, it's for you as a victim. It's going to be a complete surprise. You're going to
Mhm.
behave in a certain way. You're gonna have tunnel vision probably. You're gonna, everything's gonna feel slow. Your heart's gonna pump through the roof. Everything's gonna happen. So there's no such thing as reacting immediately, because you might think, well, this is a grab to a guy's grabbing me on my throat, on my chest, and you decide you're gonna counter immediately or instinctively with a punch or a pluck or whatever, and
Mhm.
then you didn't see, but he has a knife in the other hand. And that is what we need to deal with over here. So our first principle is always observe. Whenever attacked, submit, observe, make sure you look for a weapon and never make eye contact. So you look on the guy's chest because you can see the entire picture around him. And it boils into almost something like, if you've done CPR, what's the first thing you do if somebody is, when you get to somebody that needs CPR, is you look for a hazard before
Mhm.
you start doing compressions. Am I right? So first principle for us is submit, observe. Second principle from there is obviously get the element of surprise, use the element of surprise and gain control. That means if there's a weapon, make sure you've got control over the weapon and the limb holding the weapon if possible. Okay. But sustainable control, meaning it's easy to take away a gun to the one side and hold the arm, but it's not control if that attacker can pull it out with his reflex.
Mhm.
So for us, control is make sure you control that weapon in such a way and the limb in such a way that if he has a reflex, which he probably will have, that you don't separate from that attacker. That's
Mhm.
control. Okay. Then from there onwards, you need to turn into doing damage, massive, massive damage, wherever you have the opening, whether it's back of the head, the groin, um, wherever you've got the throat, wherever you've got the opening to do damage, you do damage, and you need to be relentless with that damage. I guess
Mhm.
so that don't hold up on that. Don't feel sorry for your for the attacker. Okay, and until it's finished. Meaning you've done the takedown, you've disarmed the gun, you've disarmed the knife. You are in control of the situation. You've got the weapon. He's down. You're up, and you've separated. You're in a safe. You're relatively safe from there. So that is what we always hammer on as the principles that we teach. And then all the techniques will fit into those segments of the principles. So whether
Mhm.
we teach you to learn a gun defense, a knife defense, or a grab to your chest, it'll all start with the first principle, which is observe, submit, look for a
Mhm.
weapon. And then from there, it'll all go in. The second phase will be, okay, whether you're disarming a gun and knife or you're dealing with a grab, will be surprise the guy, put him on the back foot, and gain control of the initial contact. And then from
Mhm.
there, obviously, do damage.
Nice. So it's through the principles that you teach rather than specific um, technique based. So that they can apply it in whatever situation they're in. And so by doing it that way, do you find that people are able to take those principles and apply it to techniques that they may never even have learned? Like if they get into a situation and let's say they've never learned, I don't know, a choke, like they've never done the self-defense against a choke, but because they have their principles, they're actually able to defend themselves.
Yeah, I would say, put it like this, if I could word it differently,
Yep.
perfect technique without the principles is probably going to be less successful than a flawed technique with perfect principles, if that makes sense. The more you can add. So I'm not a big fan of this is the ultimate system and this is the only guy I can learn from and whatever. As long as your training stays within what will really happen in a conflict situation, then I think, and if you keep it principle based, then I think in my own brain, my own opinion, that is probably your best chance of fighting back, because there's so much variables in combat and anyways that you don't necessarily know. You learn a technique exactly like this, and then the guy attacks you with on a different angle. And if you didn't know that there's variables and there's spaces in between technique that you will have to fill yourself, then I don't think you're necessarily prepared for the environment that we live in. I'm pretty sure. I don't know if there's any Swiss people watching, but I'm pretty sure you don't need that kind of approach in Switzerland. Okay, but where we live, I pretty much we always assume there's a weapon first. If there's not a weapon, then it's a bonus for us.
Nice, yeah.
So to get just to butt into that, it doesn't mean we only teach weapons. Okay, absolutely not. We equally divide it between hand-to-hand, gun, knife. We divide knife into dynamic attacks, meaning stabbings, slashes, static, more close quarters like muggings, obviously. But then we incorporate rifle, stick, pangas, which is like a machete. That's so we spread. We try and figure out, okay, what is it that we can realistically be attacked with in this country, and then we train specifically for that. But the whole spread of the spectrum is covered with the same principles.
Right. So having said that, if you were no longer in South Africa and you were in, let's say, Switzerland, right? Would you, not that you wouldn't teach all that stuff, but would your focus be more on the stuff that they would go through in Switzerland?
But like this, if I was in Switzerland, I would be really, really bored. Okay, so because what will I teach you? So, but either way, But to get back to that, like I just previously said, we cover a big spectrum, but we all follow the whole spectrum follows the same principle. If I was in a place like Switzerland, I think they would probably look at me really funny if I all of a sudden we do 2 gun points and a home invasion at 4 o'clock in the morning. I don't think they will be able to relate to that much. Although I think you can never discard something. When I moved to Cape Town, nobody knew about hijackings in the city. That was Johannesburg's problem. And in a spectrum of 10 years, everything changed. So I went. If I had to open up a facility in Switzerland, I will teach exactly the same curriculum as I do. I might just focus more on, let's say, what happens more in Switzerland. But I would always enforce it into my students that they must never assume that the situation they have now is the situation is going to be. And I always tell people, you want to train for an attack before the attack happens. Hopefully attack never happens. So it's a good way to go about and say, okay, well, these are the kind of attacks that generally happen. Think like, what are the possibilities in future? Like migration patterns are changing. Crime is going, everything evolves. A long answer for a really simple question is I probably wouldn't deviate much from what I'm doing now.
Yeah. Because like you said that when you first moved to Cape Town, nobody knew anything about carjackings, but you were training them for it, and now there are carjackings, and so you can't tell what's going to be in the future. So you have to be proactive rather than reactive, right?
Exactly.
Even though Switzerland is a very safe country.
Pardon?
Sorry?
I said we're not picking on Switzerland. We love Switzerland, but we're just using a metaphor.
Yeah, I was going to use Canada as the example.
There we go.
Because it's a relatively safe country, but even here, it's less safe every year that goes by. With like you said, the migration patterns, and we have an ever worsening drug problem, and and break-ins are a lot more frequent. Forced entries are more frequent. Where when I grew up here, if something like that happened, it was a shock. Right now, it isn't, and who knows where 10 years from now where it's going to be. Right?
To give you an idea, I know his name is William. He's an Australian. He was actually a student. I don't know him through my wife. I just met him, and he came to South Africa, and he lost his brother in Australia, being shot in the head. And Australia is a gun-free country with severe gun laws. And he said, like, if you are a criminal in Australia, you will still get a gun, and you will be the only person in that neighborhood with a gun. And that's a scary thing, where he says, like, in South Africa, or people will still carry guns. So a criminal also has to consider maybe the possibility that if you break into a house, they might shoot back. But over here, we lock our doors. We've got security fences. We've got alarm systems. And we promote the fact, get a gun, get proper training, arm yourself. And self-defense training is a big part of that. I can imagine, I visited my wife's family in Melbourne in Australia, and I was shocked that they go and sleep with doors that's unlocked. You can literally, Amazon delivers, probably in Canada as well, delivers something on your doorstep, and they leave it there for 3 or 4 days if you're away, and nobody touches it. Over here, it will disappear within 10 minutes. So exactly what you said there is, like, you need to always think, where is the world going, probably, without being negative about it. Otherwise, we're going to go nowhere. And just be realistic about what you think is going to happen, and then just train for that.
Yeah, exactly. And like you were saying with the packages, when I was a child, you could leave something at the front door, and it would be there the next day. Now, it wouldn't be, right?
Exactly.
And so it changes, like, even within a decade or two, just the amount of violence and how things can denigrate.
Exactly.
And you have to prepare for it and you don't want to be negative. You just want to be realistic, right?
Exactly.
That as, law enforcement becomes less effective and, people become angrier, and it's just a whole thing. And the whole COVID thing has just changed the game a little bit more again.
Yeah.
So your studio, is it a full-time studio, you said?
Yeah. We start, I'm pretty much here every morning at 6 a.m. Then we start our first sessions, and we've got private sessions during the day, courses, corporates, whatever. So a pretty full day. And then in the evenings, we've got always classes. So literally Monday to Saturday. And the place is pretty full-time. So this is what I do. This is the only thing I do. And I can imagine for as long as I'm going to do it.
That's good. So can you tell, like, do you have like specialized courses that you guys teach?
Yeah, look, my main thing, where I learned the most for my physical location, my studio that I'm doing, is obviously disregarding now the technique and the principle. Technique and principle, great. You've done fantastic. All the respect in the world for that. But in terms of running a facility and getting the people up to a level on a bigger scale, I'm a huge boxing fan. Everybody knows Etienne loves boxing as much as other people play golf. I do boxing. Okay. When I was in New York once, I gave some training in New York, and this is the home of boxing. I'm going to look for boxing. So I enrolled in a place called Gleason's Boxing Gym. They regard it as the best boxing gym in the world. Now, in terms of my studio, and I don't want to let people get confused between Krav Maga and boxing, because that's absolutely not the case here. It's in terms of, but what they do at Gleason's, they prepare world champions to fight.
Right.
Okay. So versus your boxer-size classes in your global gyms, they prepare people through boxing to lose weight and to look good on Instagram. Okay. So it's called the same thing, but it's definitely two different things. And if you think about it, if you take this is obviously just using boxing as a metaphor. If I can teach you boxing in 10 seconds, jab, cross, hook, uppercut, bob and weave, and footwork. That's all boxing is. Very limited system with very limited moves. So how is it possible that you can have, what's the difference in training then between training a world champion for a fight and training somebody fitness in a gym just down the road? They're all doing the same thing, but
Right.
why is it different? And I applied that principle to what I'm doing over here. And I learned a lot of it. Look, I'm not saying I learned boxing there, because my boxing is pretty average if I compare it to Krav Maga. I'm taking the system, the way that I went there 3 consecutive trips. I went to that place, and I got a really good friend they called Leon. We call him Trainer Leon. That's his name. So he was a WBC number 1 ranked welterweight. And we had long conversations, and they explained to me the system that they use, how to get people to be able to fight. Now, what I did there, I didn't say, okay, cool, I'm not going to teach boxing. I've got so much more that I must teach in our spectrum of what can happen in this country. But I'm going to prepare my people like they are going to fight. You get the idea? So like they need to be world champions in Krav Maga pretty much. Because why am I training people here? I'm training here because there's a high probability of them having to use it, which is completely different than if you would maybe doing a Krav Maga studio in Dubai. The probability of somebody using that in Dubai is probably next to nothing. So you can incorporate stuff into that school in Dubai that can make sense. You know, people want to feel good, they need a fitness aspect around it or whatever. Where I need to say, okay, I want to prepare people with self-defense training, Krav Maga, whatever, combat training, in the same way that they're going to prepare world championship boxers to do a world championship fight. Now, and I found that's where there's a bit of a lacking in terms of self-defense training. I don't want to say in Krav Maga training, because then it sounds like I'm hammering Krav Maga, which is not. I mean, obviously, this is what I do. But people would say, why? If you were going to do boxing, you want to go to fight in the UFC, you want to do boxing, or you're doing MMA, you will train very hard because you want to get into the UFC and you want to get a title shot and that's your career. So the first thing that you're going to do is you're going to train very hard so that you can fight. Okay. But the only thing that's going to happen if you lose that fight is you're going to maybe lose your ranking. You're maybe going to have to go on a different career path or whatever, or you're going to change your coach. In our situation, if we go into a knife mugging like this girl that's on the wall here, on that side, so there, so the camera's all the way around. So if that girl lost that fight, she probably would have been dead.
Right.
Okay, so I had to see. So now think of for a second, if you've got 2 boxing champions, we all know Muhammad Ali and we all know Mike Tyson. Let's say they have to go fight each other in a dream match. Okay. Both of those guys know boxing already. You can't teach Muhammad Ali after 50 fights boxing. He knows boxing.
Yep.
Mike Tyson would also train boxing. He's going to do exactly the same stuff as Muhammad Ali. The same shots, everything. Why do they still need a trainer if they know boxing already? You know, but I don't think any trainer can teach Muhammad Ali anything new about boxing for that dream match. But the trainer would prepare them in a certain way because why? Because they are going to fight. Okay, and there's consequences to losing that fight. Okay, okay. Now, if you had for a second, I always have this chat with my people and say to them, because people in South Africa that I saw, they think like self-defense is supposed to be easy training. So the way I counter that, I say to them, I create this picture for them about Muhammad Ali and Mike Tyson, and I say to them, now for a second, let's say there was a crystal ball. You couldn't see who's going to win the fight. It was impossible to see the winner, but you could definitely see that the loser is going to die from hemorrhaging, is from a blood clot or something. So you can't see the winner, but you can definitely see that the loser is going to die. Now, if you go to Muhammad Ali and Mike Tyson and say, listen, I need to share this information. I can't see if you're going to win or lose, but I can definitely tell you if you're losing, you're dead. I promise you 1 or 2 things would happen. They would either pull out of the fight, or they would jack up his training tremendously if he felt like he still has to fight. Now, because the consequence is death. Now, you have to remember, these are professional fighters who do this for a living. Where we at Krav Maga, the professional fighters want to fight. That's what they want to do. We're teaching civilians who actually don't want to fight. They just want to live peacefully. So they're not fighters to start off with in the training, but they are going to fight for their lives. Where you've got professional fighters who want to fight, and they're not prepared to fight for their lives. You see, so So I really took apart and I said, what is it that I actually want to achieve here? Okay. And I realized my market is completely different. I'm not teaching people who want to fight. I'm teaching people who just want to live in peace. But unfortunately for them, the consequences of them losing a fight is going to be greater than when a professional fighter loses the fight. And I need to do everything in my power to prepare them so that they've got the best possible chance to win, because nothing is a guarantee. So that means I need everybody that trains you to buy into that concept, that unfortunately we can't adapt to suit them. We will guide them so that they can adapt and suit combat.
Yeah.
So and not because of the ego thing at all. It's just because these are going to be this is probably going to be the consequences for them. And now, if they lose. Now, remember what I also said in the beginning. I said I want always my people to only fight if it's their lives that are at stake. So if your life's at stake, you're in any case fighting for your life. You can't lose that fight. So so we're not promoting the ego fights or the fight for the handbag or the bar fight or the, obviously I'll take care of myself if somebody wants to harass me in the street. That's a different story. But I don't want a girl that's 52 kilograms, what's at 100 pounds, that's sober. I don't want her to fight a guy that's 200 pounds and on drugs, okay, and super aggressive for a handbag. Right. But if it's because he wants to rape her, or he wants to abduct her and kill her and burn her in a field that happens over here, then she needs to fight with everything she got against this guy, which is in any case going to be an unfair fight with very, very bad consequences if she loses it.
Yeah, and that's a very good analogy. The other thing I'm thinking there in that boxing analogy is that the other advantage that the boxers have is they know when their fight is going to happen, and they can and they can analyze the other person's past fights.
Absolutely, yeah.
Right. So where our students, they don't know who they're going to fight, and they don't know when they're going to fight, and they're going in completely blind, and we have to prepare them for that possibility.
Exactly. Right? I use just earlier about the principles, but I use first and foremost in my school we focus on the principles which I've explained. Okay. Then the second thing that we work on very, very hard is their explosiveness of movement and their body conditioning. Because you can have the best intentions, you can have the best technique and whatever. Somebody stabbing you with a knife and you want to shoot forward and your Achilles tendon snaps and you even collapse without even knowing what happened and you're on the ground in front of them. So first things that we work on is your principles. Second thing is your explosiveness, conditioning, your aggression. That I couple aggression and explosiveness is pretty much the same thing for me. Okay. I'll touch on that a little bit later. Then the third one that we work is obviously, I would say, technique. There's definitely a strong technique aspect. So if I'm going to teach somebody how to disarm a gun against the head, I'm going to tell them, do this, grab it like this, step here, try and do that. That's going to be specifics. Okay. So you've got the principles, explosiveness, exact specifics, but then we work on your adaptation. That's the fourth thing that we focus on a lot. And the last thing we focus on is just your general fitness. The reason for that is because the fitter somebody is, the better they can train. So if somebody's not fit, then they're going to come for maybe one class a week. Or they might do the first week 3 or 4 classes. The next week they're feeling horrible and they're skipping. They're coming for one class, and then they continue. And then the recovery is a little bit different. And every time it's an effort for it's always going to be effort, but they just feel like they're not recovering between classes. And if they're doing a 1-hour session with us, because we've got 2 1-hour sessions back to back, then the more repetitions the fitter they are, then they can do more repetitions in that hour. It doesn't matter what anybody says about that. Although your fitness is not that important in an actual conflict, in a fight, because it's going to be too short. Okay, you're not going to fight the guy for 30 or 40 minutes. But I need your fitness to be up on a certain level, so you take in info better, and you do a lot more repetitions in the session, and you can come to more classes more regularly over a longer period. So I've got members here. My average time that a member spends with us is about 1.5 years. And that's full-time training. We've got a really, really high member retention because I tell them it's not a quick fix. and they can definitely see the progression going from there.
That's good. Now, do you do firearms courses and stuff like that, or just the defense against firearms?
No, we do everything. We teach to defend. We teach how to use as well. So, look, what I will do is I'll teach everybody how to use the firearm, how to use under pressure, for the individual needs. So I'm not going to go in. Number one, it's not my speciality. I'm not going to go in and teach like what he done does. That's where he comes from. I'm not going to teach units that need to do it, because that's not that. I've got individual skill. So I'm going to teach. You've got a firearm. This is how you use it. Or you are 2 guys, or 3 guys. You're going to enter in a house. This is what you're going to do. Like I said, I've never been in the military, so I'm not going to give military training. I'm not going to give something that I'm not from. I'll do, because I feel, what's the point to that? Okay, there's people that can do that much better. Okay, but what I do in our case is like obviously the individual skills. So I use Israeli point shooting techniques that we are using, and then typical thing: your shooting position, shooting from the ground, movement, changing your magazines, emergency drills. So you can take care of yourself really, really good with a firearm.
Nice. All right, sir. So if someone wanted to train with you, where are you guys located?
Okay, so we've got 2 options. The one is obviously a physical training, which is in Cape Town. So, and that's straightforward. I've got a website, truecrafttraining.com. So truecrafttraining.com, and that directs him to the website. And the other thing that we did, we've just launched a platform called truecraftonline.com. And that is where we're adding on courses. During this month, between the month of September and October, we're adding more and more courses on. We've already got which is basically the world's first gender-based violence course on that platform. So we did it because I'm training a NGO called Fight Back SA. So we train them. I train their trainers, and then they train people free of charge in disadvantaged communities. So where your cases of rape, domestic violence, all that is sky high. It's off the charts. So they set up these workshops where these girls can get free training, and they rotate through the areas. So we use that, the scenarios that come across them. They are physically being told, like last night, I was beaten, or this is my story. So we've got a pretty very brutal, honest, realistic idea of what happens in terms of gender-based violence. So, and we designed a program that focuses on that first, because we felt that's our biggest need in the beginning. That's on the platform already. And then during October, we are actually busy shooting in this month. We're going to launch a Truekrav course, which is obviously not gender-based violence focused, but which is for your general, for everybody.
Cool.
Yeah.
I'll have to check that out.
Yeah.
All right, sir. Well, I've enjoyed chatting with you today, and hopefully in the future you can come back on the show and we can have more discussions, especially after your online courses up and running, and we can discuss some of the stuff that you're doing on there. All right. Well, I want to thank you for being on Krav Life, and have a good day.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. I really appreciate it. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Yeah, cheers.